Okay, I think we'll start now. Hello everybody, and very happy to welcome you here today to this side event, which is called The Role of SDG 16+ in Accelerating 2030 Agenda Monitoring and Implementation. So my name is Deirdre de Burca. I'm the Advocacy Coordinator of Forus. And Forus, as many of you know, is a global civil society network, and our membership includes 69 national development platforms and 7 regional coalitions. So I'm very pleased to be moderating this side event today, but I think it's important to name the others who were very involved in organising this side event. So the lead organiser of the side event is the National Planning Commission, which is part of the Government of Nepal. And the other co-organisers are, for us, as I mentioned already, the Global Alliance for Reporting Progress on Peaceful, Just and Inclusive Societies, also the Danish Institute of Human Rights, the Asia Development Alliance, the NGO Federation of Nepal, UNSCAP, the TAP Network, and the Permanent Secretariat of the Community of Democracies. So we have all been involved in co-organising this side event, and it's going to be a really important discussion here today, and I'll tell you briefly why. I think because the importance of implementing the SDGs as an integrated and interlinked policy agenda, it's often very unpopular when you say you have a favourite SDG. But to be honest, if I did have a favourite SDG, I think it would be SDG 16+, and I know a lot of others on this in this side event would possibly agree with me, because SDG 16 does break new ground in terms of the way it approaches sustainable and inclusive development. So it gives prominence to the human rights agenda, which I think is very welcome, particularly the issue of civil and political rights, and it also makes that sustainable development can't be achieved without these rights being vindicated. But however, it's important to point out that because the whole area of governance has become a new area of focus now because of Goal 16, and particularly for official statistics, there's a limited number of international standards available that define the measure of governance at the moment. And this is one of the challenges that I think we'll be speaking about during the side event today. So this means that when statistical offices are looking at and trying to produce governance data, they've little experience in this area or in establishing the type of inclusive systems that are needed to monitor and to report on governance, peace and security. And really there has been a missed opportunity to date where using data and information is concerned, particularly linked to Goal 16+, to include data from other relevant reporting processes, so including human rights mechanisms such as the UPR processes, to report on issues related to peace, justice and inclusion. So Forus and its members are very clear, and we hope to discuss this today, that citizen-led and citizen-generated data also needs to be explored and recognised by governments. So we do, Forus, prioritise Goals 16 and 17 in its advocacy, and in the official HLPF review process that's going on at the moment, Forus and its members have done a lot of advocacy around having Goal 16 reviewed every year by the HLPF in the same way that Goal 17 is. We believe this is essential, and we hope that this is something that the UN member states will agree to in the coming few years. So finally, I think I will mention that we're going to be launching our Forus Goal 16 report today, and we've mentioned this report to a lot of you who are on the call. The name of the report is Realising the Potential of Goal 16 of the 2030 Agenda to Promote Civic Space. We're very excited about this report. It contains 18 civic space case studies that were submitted by our different national platforms around the world, and we hope to, as I say, present this report to you later, and my colleague Jasna Mohan Singh from ADA, who co-produced the report, will say a few words about it later. But I want to move quickly on now to introducing our excellent panellists for today, and we're very lucky to have a range of different panellists, the first of which is Minister Bahadur Shahi from the National Planning Commission, the Government of Nepal. We also have Jitram Lama, who's with the NGO Federation of Nepal. We have Priya Sood from UNDP, the Global Alliance on Goal 16+. We have John Romano from the TAP Network. We have Kirstina Helland Strandby from the Danish Institute for Human Rights. We have Hitomi Rankin from UNESCAP. We have Patricia Galdames from the Permanent Secretariat of the Community of Democracies. And we have Jasna Mohan Singh from the ADA, who's the ADA Regional Coordinator, and she will speak last. So I'm going to start by introducing our first speaker, we're going to start with more of a global overview in terms of Goal 16+, and then we'll move to the national context of Nepal in particular, where we'll ask the representative of the National Planning Commission and the NFN to actually present to us the national context in Nepal, where Goal 16+ is concerned. But we'll begin with Priya Sood, who's with the Global Alliance for Goal 16+. I'm going to ask her to speak for 7 minutes, and she's going to speak to us and present a global overview of progress with implementing and monitoring Goals SDG 16+. So Priya, I'd like you to introduce you, if you wouldn't mind switching on your camera, and over to you.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Thank you for inviting us to be here. It's a beautiful 6:30 in the morning in New York City. We're marching on in this HLPF, and it's exciting to see a great group of people committed, even though it's a virtual conversation. I'm going to, as Deirdre said, I'm representing the Global Alliance for Reporting on Progress on Peaceful, Just, and Inclusive Society. It's a very long title. Basically, it encompasses a coordinating platform of member states, which is member state-led UN agencies, private sector, and civil society to really advance and focus on monitoring and reporting on SDG 16+. And it's a link in my title, and you can click on it to get more details. We're hosted by UNDP, but there's 6 other UN agencies that support the co-facilitating process. So it's a very ambitious and exciting joint endeavor. Next slide, please. Deirdre already spoke a little bit to the issue, the challenges facing SDG 16+. Last year was reviewed thematically reviewed at the high-level political forum, clearly realized by the international community that it has not advanced. We released a report. This is the title of the report, and just next slide, please. I'll just briefly speak to some of the global recommendations that came out of the report and how we're trying to discuss how to meet these recommendations and emphasize them even further and activate them. Effective implementation and whole of government approach, as well as a whole of society approach on the next slide. Really working with the political leadership to reinforce the importance of investment in SDG 16+, more so now than ever because of the current crisis that we are in. SDG 16 is an enabling goal. It links to other goals. If this one is not realized, the other goals will be affected, and this comes even closer to home when we're looking at access to health services and SDG 16.3. Measurement, which is what we're, I think, focusing on a little bit more. It's a very real challenge in the sense that it's a politically sensitive goal. Really, it's a relatively new goal because the governance wasn't really touched upon in the MDG era. So member states and civil society are really struggling in terms of how to approach the indicators and target measurements. Next slide, please. The report mentioned that it estimates that this Institute for Economics and Peace report that we referenced in ours, that it will at least be 5 years before data becomes available for many of the missing indicators for many of the countries. Next slide. I wanted to sort of jump into how we can use the VNRs more effectively in terms of measuring and trying to build a community of stakeholders to help us measure better on SDG 16. Why are VNRs important? I think I'm preaching partly to the crowd here, but initially, there were not that many that were being submitted, but they have in fact doubled since they've come into existence, and member states are recognizing their importance and how to ensure that there's some level of accountability, there's some measurement in where SDGs are in their countries and what gaps exist and how to move those gaps forward. It's really what we're trying to advocate for is a more inclusive and participatory process through the VNRs. And the next slide, please. I'll just speak to some of the stats that we received. One of our private sector companies that work with on our steering committee, the White & Case, does an annual review of the VNR. So this is in particular to 2019. 47 submitted their VNRs last year, more than double from 2016. They've all mentioned that SDG 16 data availability is crucial, is lacking, and they're really looking at, member states are really asking for unique and innovative ways of trying to collect that data and monitor it. They've all spoken about SDG 16 in terms of referencing at least one of the indicators in SDG 16, but they've all said that it's one of the untapped data opportunities to monitor. Next slide, please. So this slide is quite tiny, but it looks to how countries have measured which indicators, and you'll notice at the very top that 42 countries looked at institutions and policies for poverty reduction, so 42 out of the 48. However, if you look at the bottom, the last three: promote non-discriminatory laws and policies, equitable trade system, tax collection. There are less and less countries reported on those. So we're just trying to, they're just trying to show here which targets were measured on more, and some of the conclusions are that maybe there's been more public awareness around women's rights and gender equality, and therefore they've actioned those indicators data a little bit more than less. And if you look further down in terms of equitable trade systems, that really is jointly connected to other countries and regions. So really understanding how to develop that is interesting. And that's a SDG 17 one, but it's related to SDG 16. Next slide, please. Here again, it's showing that 97% of 97.87% submitted a measurement or a target on all forms of discrimination in education. You'll see violence against women and girls again, women's participation in leadership. And again, if you look at the least reported target, safe public spaces, that's a disconcerting one, as we all know, and it's very much related to the report that Forus has put out with ADA on civic spaces. What does that mean, and why aren't countries reporting on that, and where is the sensitivity around that? We all recognize there is a sensitivity around that, and so looking that a bit further is important, and it's great that this report has been put out. Next slide, please. I'll just talk briefly about some joint initiatives that the Global Alliance is running and supporting. One is called a Survey Initiative, and it's run by UNODC, OHCHR, and UNDP, and these are three of the agencies that are part of our group. They're looking at trying to, basically there's 9 global indicators, and very few countries have data on those indicators. So we as Global Alliance in this group is looking at ways to develop household surveys that can have been tested, and they're not final yet, but they're still going through the last round of testing, but that we will be releasing these household surveys that can be used in countries to support this data collection. Next slide, please. We've just launched this guide to report on SDG 16 in VNRs. The link is in the slide. It's on the SDG 16 hub. I encourage you to take a look because it goes through a step-by-step process about how to develop an SDG 16 chapter, very much looking at data gaps and collection and how to go about helping complete that step, really encouraging stakeholder consultations and engaging diverse communities, not just those that are in capital, but really looking to other areas, local governance, civil society organizations, to bring that all of you on board together with member states to look at this crucial challenge. So it's just been put out, so I encourage you to look at it. Next slide. The Priya group, if you don't know, has a handbook on governance statistics that was released in March. I must be honest with you, it is quite dense, but super helpful. And there is a plan to put out some summary sections for each chapter of this handbook that's outcoming this fall by UNDP and the Priya City Group. So we encourage you to take a look at this resource. And the next slide. I just wanted to encourage you to sign on to the SDG 16 Hub, because several of these resources can help you start the discussion. Also, we'd be happy to link up to the report that was just put out by Deirdre, by Forus and EDA. But I encourage you to sign on, because we are creating a sort of open space SDG 16 monitoring group, really focusing on data and monitoring of SDG 16 from a human rights angle as well. And this is coming out of a workshop that was developed, that was implemented in February, where I met Deirdre actually for the first time. So I encourage you to join that space, and we hope to start some discussions as we move forward over this next year, especially in this current reality where we can't meet face to face. At least we can continue this conversation. Thank you. I'll end there. Hope that wasn't too fast.
Priya, thank you very much. From my point of view, it wasn't too fast at all, because we have quite a few speakers, so you were very prompt, and thanks for that and for the very interesting overview of the work of the Global Alliance. I'd like to move on now to the next speaker, who's John Romano from the Transparency, Accountability and Participation Network, and he'll be speaking about the key roles of spotlight reporting and follow-up of VNRs in Goal 16 Plus monitoring and implementation. So over to you, John.
Great, thanks a lot, Deirdre, and thanks to all for joining wherever you're joining from today. As Deirdre mentioned, my name is John Romano. I work with the Transparency, Accountability and Participation Network, or TAP network for short. So we're a global civil society coalition working around SDG 16 on a thematic level, but then also on accountability for the entire 2030 agenda. Our work has included a lot of work, as Deirdre mentioned, on spotlight reporting, particularly around SDG 16 plus, with many of our partners at the national and local level. We've done a lot of work to help guide partners on how to do this spotlight reporting, taking stock of the experiences with spotlight reporting over the past 4 or 5 years or so, since 2015. And one of the resources that we just launched this past month, we launched a report with GIZ, basically taking a look at spotlight reports on SDG 16 and comparing them with the VNR reports on SDG 16 from the past 2 years. It's an analytical report that does a side-by-side analysis of both types of reports. And as Priya mentioned previously, what we're really trying to encourage is a process in countries where the VNR reports are synonymous and work together with civil society and these other spotlight reports that come from civil society. I think just some brief reflections from that report. I'll provide a link for all of you to access the report so you can dive a bit deeper yourselves. But I think there were some key findings for us from this analysis, and I think the first is that right now there's, I think, overall very little acknowledgement of the existence of spotlight reports in VNRs, let alone many efforts for the VNRs to actually take the reflections from these spotlight reports into account in the actual VNR report. And I think this needs to be improved upon going forward. I mean, this needs to be a more collaborative approach, and these spotlight reports need to be recognized by governments themselves. And have governments actually work with them. And I think, you know, oftentimes we hear governments respond to spotlight reports by, you know, saying that, you know, it's often seen as a naming and shaming exercise where civil society is just going to be critical of the government. And I think one of the things that we found from this analysis and this report is that overwhelmingly, spotlight reports were not used for naming and shaming, but instead they were used for actually providing concrete recommendations for governments on where they need to improve and how civil society can actually contribute to advancing SDG 16 in these particular countries. So I think it's these spotlight reports we found are not about finger pointing. Instead, they're about trying to get us to fulfill some of the gaps where governments may be lacking in particular. So in that way, they should be seen as complementary to the official VNR reports. You know, we also often hear from governments that it's very difficult to consult with civil society on a very broad level, on a national level, and you know that is a fair point. But I do think that spotlight reports can be used as an efficient way to integrate civil society inputs into the VNR report. Oftentimes we found that, overwhelmingly again, that spotlight reports were put together in coalitions at the national level. So they were put together by coalitions of civil society organizations that came together to provide this analysis and these reports. So I think it's a really efficient way for governments to really take up civil society inputs in the cases that they do have challenges in doing so. We also found that, you know, the spotlight reports, the methodologies varied in nearly every case. And therefore they were, I think, different in methodology and approach from VNR reports. But we did find that data gaps were ever-present challenge for VNRs and spotlight reports. This is going to be a recurring theme, I'm sure, throughout today's discussion and over the years ahead. But we did see that spotlight reports did take into account non-official data sources. So as Deirdre mentioned, the citizen-generated data, survey-based data, and I think the spotlight reports in that sense can really help put our finger on the pulse of how people are experiencing progress from many levels and reaching grassroots groups as well. One final point is that, again, spotlight reports focused on the recommendations to governments on what needs to improve. And I very much think that as part of the VNR process, that's exactly what we're hoping for from the VNR process, is that government should use this as an opportunity to take stock of where we are on progress in a particular country, and then make commitments on what it is that they're going to do to overcome some of these challenges or make progress towards some of these difficult issues. And so that's what we want to see more of in the VNR process is the recommendations, the commitments by governments to actually do better around the issues where we may be lacking in progress. And one final point, Deirdre mentioned that, you know, we also work on what happens after the VNR report. This is just as important as what happens leading up to the VNR and reporting, is what governments do to implement, and again, how do we improve progress? And so one resource that we are working on right now with UNDP is basically a guide for how do you mainstream SDG 16 into national programs, particularly after you report, and then how do you prepare to report in the next cycle? How do you prepare your next VNR report? So we're currently working on this resource with UNDP. We'll launch it later this year in the next few months. So we'll have much more information on that that we can share in the next few months. But again, the focus on what comes next and how do we actually use reporting as a way to enhance implementation and improve the areas that we need to improve. I think that's kind of the main message that the VNR should really serve going forward. But I'll end there. Thanks, Deirdre.
Thanks very much, John, and thanks for what was a very constructive presentation. I think you're right that sometimes when particularly governments hear the term spotlight report, they think of just negativity and criticism and so on. I think it's really important to approach the spotlight reports in the kind of positive way that you've mentioned, being realistic in assessment and looking forward, but trying to be as constructive as possible. So our next speaker, and thanks for being so prompt, John, is Kirstina Helland Strandby from the Danish Institute of Human Rights. So Kirstina is going to speak to us about the role of human rights education in promoting enhanced Goal 16 plus monitoring and implementation. So Kirstina, over to you.
Thank you, Deirdre, and greetings from Copenhagen. I will just
Kirstina, your sound is not great. Maybe could you speak a little closer to the microphone, or?
Yes. Is it better?
That sounds much better, yeah.
That's good. So, can you see my slides now?
Yes, but your sound still isn't great, so if you can speak close to the microphone, but your slides are perfect.
Okay, I'm not sure exactly what to do. I hope the sound is okay.
Yeah, that's a bit better.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so yes, I am Kirstina from the Danish Institute for Human Rights. And as Deirdre said, I will speak about the role of human rights education to enhance Goal 16 plus monitoring and implementation. And I will focus on a specific tool that we have developed to monitor human rights education under Target 47. So just to begin with the link between SDG 16 plus and human rights education, we really believe that the learning about human rights is key in building peaceful, just, and inclusive societies, and that education must seek to empower, not least those who are left behind. So in that sense, human rights education is very important, also for 16. And also states are accountable for human rights education implementation, also in relation to various target groups. And also, not least, that there's also a data gap when it comes to human rights education, the component on human rights education under Target 47. And if we zoom in here on the graphic, it's not that clear when we zoom in, but we also see here the culture of peace and nonviolence in relation to peaceful societies. We see education on human rights and gender equality, and also here on the promotion of global citizenship. And I would also add non-discrimination when we're talking about also inclusive society. If we look at the recommendations from the UN human rights systems, we can also see a great number of recommendations linking up to specific Target 47. There's a lot when it comes to children, women and girls, you can see, but there's a lot of target groups mentioned. And when we zoom in, our tool is specifically zooming in on primary, secondary education and teacher training. We also see a number of recommendations for this area. I will just briefly introduce a more general perspective on our tools and on the SDGs and human rights that the Danish Institute has been working on for a few years now. And it's very specifically working on this alignment of human rights data monitoring, reporting, and the SDG implementation, monitoring and reporting. And if you see the picture here with the tools, we have on top some more general tools linking the Sustainable Development Goals with all the human rights instruments, and also the Data Explorer. We can look specifically into each country recommendations. If we look at the two at the bottom, the Indigenous Navigators Tool Database, and then the SDG 47 Human Rights Education Monitoring Tool, we're looking at specific target groups. And this is also to introduce, I'm going to zoom in on the 47, but it's also to introduce this methodology that could be used on other target groups as well. for instance, human rights defenders would be highly relevant in this case as well. And it is building on the Office of the Human Rights, the Office of the High Commissioner's methodology on human rights indicators that focuses on structural, process, and outcome indicators. We're also looking at specific or alternative data sources. So, for example, with the human rights education tool, we are looking at specifically to have national human rights institutions to provide the data. And for the Indigenous Navigators tool, it's also looking specifically at local communities and other relevant actors. So to zoom in on the specific Forus 7 tool, this is the platform that is online but not launched yet. So for now, the pilot is going on and the data will be available in September. But this will be a website where you can browse the data that will be available in the tool and compare. And for now, we have national human rights institutions, primarily from the African region, providing data during the next couple of months. So the setup of this tool is, it also builds on a very inclusive workflow. So you can create a survey, everyone can become a respondent, and you can fill in several questionnaires, surveys, which also means that you could do national, but you can also do subnational respondents. And you can invite co-respondents, colleagues, it could also be external in partnerships, responding to these questionnaires. You can invite a reviewer, and that is not mandatory unless you want to publish the data, then you have to have someone review the data. The data remains the property of respondent and is only published if it's consent. And then we will also, there will be an administrator validating, so there's no sensitive data submitted before we publish into the database. If we zoom in on the specific tool, you can see here, this is the human rights education tool. We have 5 domains, so policy domain, curricula, teacher education, student assessment, and learning environment, which also links up to the target Forus 7. And each question is also disaggregated into educational levels. You can see here, they click for the answer. It's provided guidance and also guidance for data sources. So where would you be able to find an answer? And then there's also a link to human rights standards and mechanism for each indicator. So you can scroll down and see, so this is a general comment, for example, that I'm showing here, that if for the monitoring that you can link each indicator and each answer to other reporting bodies. It's also, you're provided with like a dashboard, an overview of how you're doing while you're responding, and also you get a final report at the end. And this is also, so you're able to, or the respondents are able to use this in more advocacy work, or also in, for example, in VNR, other reporting mechanisms. And you can see here we provided with charts. So for example, with the domain score in general, I zoom in on the curricula, so 1 domain for each indicator here. And then we also have domain scores across the educational levels. So this was a very brief introduction to our tool, but please reach out if you have any questions.
Thanks very much, Kirstina, and really thank you, and thank you to the Danish Institute of Human Rights for the amazing tools that you make available very widely to anybody who's interested through your website. I know you've done a mapping of human rights, the various human rights conventions and treaties and so on, onto the SDGs, which really helps those who maybe aren't so familiar with the whole human rights treaties and so on, to become aware of exactly the links between the extent to which those commitments to human rights are embedded in the SDGs themselves. So thank you for that presentation, Kirstina, and we may have some questions for you afterwards when we open up for discussion. But we'll move now to our next speaker, who is Minister Bahadur Shahi from the National Planning Commission in the Government of Nepal. And we're very honoured to have the speaker with us today to speak about the efforts of the Nepalese government to promote the acceleration of Goal 16+ monitoring and implementation in Nepal. So over to you, Mr. Shahi. Okay, I'm not sure whether, so maybe Jitram, could you maybe come in and speak first, and then perhaps we can ascertain whether Mr. Shahi is available or not.
Hello, can you hear me, please?
Yes.
Thank you very much, dear Thank you very much, dear Madam. First of all, I would like to thank you, the organizer, for providing me this opportunity to share the experience of Nepal government on the SDG 16+. Let me allow to share a few points about SDG 16+ on behalf of Government of Nepal. On behalf of Government of Nepal, United Nations General Assembly has endorsed the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goal on 24th September 2015. For Nepal, it was a meaningful coincidence as Nepal promulgated its constitution only 3 days earlier. Nepal's constitution protects and promotes fundamental rights of people and communities. It respects unity in diversity by recognizing multicultural and diverse characteristics of Nepal. Among the 17 goals, SDG 16 deals with the core issue of peace, justice, and strong institution. Thus, the goal is taken as the cornerstone to attaining the rest of the goals. The target of Goal 16 seeks necessary layers to develop effective, accountable, and transparent institutions at all levels. For achieving set targets of SDGs, being aligned with this, NPC has conducted a study on SDG 16+ progress review, a call to action to change. It has identified and recommended several thematic areas to build transformative strategy and take action in the country. Recently, we have published SDG progress report, presented VNR report, and implemented SDG localization manual with local indicators in the country. During the VNR process, we have consulted more than 40 federation, network, and alliances of civil society organizations in Nepal, as well as the private sector, cooperative sector, and other expert professionals as well. The idiocentric nature of Nepal's diversity resolve the build on egalitarian society funded on the proportional, inclusive, and participatory principle in order to ensure economic equality, prosperity, and social justice by eliminating all forms of discrimination. Furthermore, Nepal is committed to protect and promote the democratic norms and values of civil liberties, human rights, periodic election, press freedom, freedom of speech, and right to freedom of association, independent, impartial, and competent judiciary system. To ensure access to justice at grassroots for marginalized, deprived, and vulnerable people, Nepal has made its unique local level mechanism as a judicial committee headed by deputy head of the local government. Nepal's constitution had guaranteed rights of equity and equality, such as political representation and inclusive participation. Evidently, we have made exemplary progress on the proportionate representation of women, with 1/3 in the federal parliament and provincial assembly, and more than 2/5 at local levels. Meanwhile, we have implemented gender-friendly policies and programs that include citizenship, right to property, and equal lineage, right to women, right to participation in state bodies on the basis of inclusive principle and just societies. just in order to transformative strategy and action to build peaceful, just and inclusive society, Nepal has made specific constitutional and institutional arrangement along with the greatly increasing in investment for their effective and efficient functionality. We have established a category National Human Rights Commission. Similarly, the Constitutional Commission related to women, Dalit, inclusion, Tharu, Muslim, etc. are also functional at present. Likewise, Nepal has made other mechanisms to prevent and respect the citizens' potential for peaceful societies, such as a National Information Commission, Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Commission of Investigation on Enforced Disappeared Person, and other formal and administrative mechanisms, to name a few. Dear moderator, Nepal has made several efforts to enhance transparency, promote accountability, and create corruption-free public institutions. The ultimate goal is to inculcate public sector integrity in Nepal, a political commitment observed since the last 2 decades. 2 decades have paved the way for accountable and transparent governance and the adaptation of the constitutional legal measures. Nevertheless, marvelous progress has been noticed on the indicator of people's perception on corruption, which is decreased from 29 in 2015 to 10 in 2019. Government of Nepal has implementing numerous social protection security schemes such as medical treatment, health, disability, old age, single woman, and student scholarship. In order to achieve set result, the government has staked on effective capital investment, human resource development, capacity enhancement, and policy reform as a major instruments. Similarly, synergy making in tools and techniques by collaborating and partnering with international communities, non-governmental actors, civil society organizations, private sectors, cooperative are seen the priority action of government to meet the consistency in visions, strategy, and action. The current COVID-19 crisis and other looming challenges such as climate change that we have been facing have clearly shown need of long-term further collaboration and interconnected approaches to address ongoing impasse. Before I conclude, I call for international solidarity for cooperation and just societies across the world. I look forward to fruitful deliberation ahead and discussion. I hope that we can chart action that will be valuable to those who need it the most and fulfill the overarching goals of leaving no one behind and reaching the farthest behind first. I thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shahi, for what was a very wide-ranging description of the attempts that the Nepalese government is making to prioritise Goal 16 plus. And thank you very much for sharing that information with us. The next speaker now will complement your presentation, because the next speaker is going to speak about the role of Nepalese civil society in promoting the acceleration of Goal 16 plus monitoring and implementation. So I'd like to invite Jitram Lama to speak for 7 minutes, and we are running a little over time, so Jitram, I would ask you to just be sure to stay to time. So over to you, Jitram.
Thank you, Ms. Moderator Deirdre. Government representatives, UN representatives, CSOs, media, and other delegates of this side event. First of all, on behalf of NGO Federation of Nepal and Nepalese Forum and entire Nepalese civil society organization, would like to welcome all of you again and thank you for providing this opportunity to be one of co-organizer of this important HLP of 2020 side event. I have pleasure stating that we have been able to organize this event with National Planning Commission of Nepal as a lead organizer and other lead co-lead organizer. I thank the National Planning Commission of Nepal for this initiative. SDG 16 plus consists of goals and targets that are essentially the issues that CSOs are more concerned about. Accelerating and achieving SDG 16 as well as SDG 5, SDG 10 and other SDGs need CSO engagement. Not only that, CSO's contribution, monitoring and are essential for these goals. In this sense, CSOs and SDG 16 are integral. In case of Nepal, NGO Federation of Nepal has played a vital role to create common platforms for interaction among government institutions, UN agencies, other development partners, major groups, and other stakeholders such as indigenous peoples, persons with disabilities, the sexual and gender minorities, Dalits, Madhisi, Muslims, women and girls, youths, children, senior citizens, and marginalized communities. In creating a synergy, we established Nepal SDG Forum, a common shared platform to implement the SDGs in Nepal. Major role of this forum is on awareness raising, orientation, and capacity building, mainly of CSOs, so that they can make an informed and meaningful engagement for SDGs. Besides this, we have made publication on SDGs, including both English and Nepali language. We have been producing knowledge and advocacy messages emphasizing the human rights, transparency, accountability, and institutional capability as an enabler of SDGs. As we attempt to integrate human rights in development efforts, we have been emphasizing on implementation and monitoring of SDGs from human rights prospects. Even at present, Nepalese CSOs are representing in Human Rights Monitoring Network led by National Human Rights Commission. We have been assessing how the COVID-19 pandemic will affect human rights situation, especially SDG 16 in Nepal. We are focusing that human rights-based approach to SDG can help a lot to leave no one behind. As we participated on VNR process in 2017, but Nepalese civil society has been engaged more effectively in 2020. In a participative and collaborative way, Nepalese civil society organizations have published civil society spotlight report on SDGs by including civil society perspectives, assessment of progress and achievement, indicating gaps and challenges, and making recommendation and call for actions to achieve 2030 agenda. The recommendations were submitted to Government of Nepal, and Government of Nepal incorporated our concern on government VNR as possible. This is noteworthy that government led by National Planning Commission has been conducted consultation among all stakeholders in preparation of the current VNR, and Government of Nepal recognized CSOs in official delegation team for VNR presentation. In this regard, as a delegate member, I would like to thank Government of Nepal, especially Vice Chair and member of and other entire team of National Planning Commission. Apart from this, Nepalese CSOs have been making attempt to play a role of watchdogs, monitor, and contributors to accelerate and achieve SDG 16+. Efforts are continued to provide complementary data and information while providing critical inputs. As necessary, Nepalese CSOs have been making advocacy, campaigns, dialogues, and putting pressure to seriously consider inclusion, justice, human rights, and good governance, and above all, leaving no one behind in the SDGs. We, Nepal SDG Forum, is a recognized CSO platform, is facilitating all the progress, organizing national and international events such as People's Assembly, SDG 16+ Forum, SDG Action Campaign, and SDG localization activities across the country with innovative solutions and practice to achieve 2030 agenda. Nevertheless, CSOs and governments should work with the new work creatively and with increased effectiveness. For this, our collective efforts will be necessary. I thank you all for your patience.
Thank you very much, Jitram, for a very good, succinct presentation, but also one that really highlights the extent to which civil society in Nepal is complementing and working with the government to try and achieve the implementation of the SDGs, and particularly SDG 16. So moving on now to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Hitomi Rankin from UNESCAP, and Hitomi is going to provide us with a regional overview of progress from the UNESCAP region in terms of accelerating the monitoring and implementation of Goal 16+. So over to you, Hitomi.
Thank you very much, Deirdre, and thank you to all participants for your attention. I would like to congratulate Forus for its work in the Global Partnership, and I would like to recognize Minister Shahi, other government representatives and other speakers, and for the excellent presentations. Really, I'm very appreciative. So my name is Hitomi Rankin. I work with ESCAP, covering the Asia Pacific region. I focus on sustainable development, technical assistance, and policy advocacy and stakeholder engagement. And I'm part of the team which is responsible for sustainable development processes for the Asia Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development and the follow-up and review of the 2030 Agenda, including around the VNR processes. And as part of this work, we have undertaken to provide goal profiles around each of the SDGs. And the Goal 16 profile was produced in coordination with and in close collaboration with other parts of the UN system, including UNICEF, UNDP, Human Rights, ODC, and was shared at the 2016 APFSD. And I'll provide a few highlights from that and then provide some commentary. So just to point out where we are doing better, right? So we do see that there's a reduction in the number of external conflicts, although we have heightening geopolitical tensions. We also see a reduction in homicide victims, yeah, the numbers overall. And we see that we have improvements in coverage of legal identities, including birth registration. And this is a key area for SGAP colleagues in the statistics division. It's been the focus of a very successful campaign, right? Now, we kind of all have a sense of where we're doing worse, right? Terrorism, insurgency, political instability. We have children and adolescents who are particularly vulnerable to violence in the region. And over a third of our women face sexual violence. And over 7 out of 10 have experienced physical discipline or psychological aggression. This is based on data from 21 countries. So just these figures alone kind of tell you the scope of SDG 16 and the kinds of issues that we need to monitor. And these figures, worryingly, we know are likely to have increased in the time of COVID, right? So we have shared concern around, and this is supported by the data, around the limited improvements and erosion in the rule of law and protection of human rights. Public access to information and protection of fundamental freedoms needs to be properly implemented as legislated. Abuse, exploitation, trafficking, and all forms of violence against and torture of children continues. We have corruption and bribery restrictions on civic space. And Asia and the Pacific as a region has the highest number of journalists murdered, as well as the highest numbers of unsentenced detainees. We also have the concern that the perception of public sector corruption is increasing and the participation of business in corruption is high. So it's about 23% of businesses that have participated in corruption if we look at the form of bribery alone. Yeah. So if we look at other forms, the figure may be different. So if we do have these issues, we know what they are, right? Now, when we look at the monitoring needs and the actions that are needed, we need to acknowledge the times that we're in. And I just wanted to pull back a little bit to look at that. So the first thing is that the COVID crisis lays bare the need for commitment to Goal 16, right? This is really, really critical, okay? Secondly, the awareness around systematic discrimination is being reviewed, right? It's increasing across the world, and it's a point at which we can, as those who are interested in supporting SDG 16 implementation, really pay attention to the kinds of issues which are raised and the entry points for opening the dialogue. We're also in a situation where inequality is deepening, so indeed it's the moment for action on Leave No One Behind. 4, the issue of youth, right, is really, really important. So we have a generation of youth who are disenfranchised now by the COVID, and the lack of investment in infrastructure, IT in particular, health systems which are failing, and governance systems which are also failing, right? Despite the very, very good efforts which are made by some governments, as we have just heard from Nepal, right? So we have really to look at the context in which we're looking at SDG 16 and how things are changing. And with this in mind, I just make a few comments and you know, being aware of the time. We know that monitoring is really challenging. So sufficient data is available for only 36% of the SDG indicators in Asia and the Pacific, and 17 of the 23 SDG 16 indicators are classified as Tier 2 and Tier 3. And SCAP's joint report with the Asia Development Bank and UNDP has always stressed since 2016 in its annual report that increasing citizen participation, including monitoring efforts, is critical, not just for securing access to more data and better data, but also for building awareness and for increasing civic engagement. And there are opportunities for doing this in a way that we harness and innovatively apply IT. But there's a whole community of young people who are interested in innovation and application of IT, which can be explored. I really would like to stress the need for connecting with young people in particular. So we see from global research that youth are less and less interested in governance issues. If we combine that with the fact that many are disenfranchised, we have a very worrying context. So where does the next push for SDG 16 acceleration come from if our youth are not that interested? So what are the opportunities for promoting different kinds of learning, especially around human rights education, as we've heard, and for realizing the right for participation? We need to look at the kinds of opportunities that maybe even this disruptive force of the COVID presents. The work that Nepal is taking will set the stage for strengthening the whole of society effort, which will come in the future. But how can we as a community take this forward and connect with young people better, I think is going to be really critical. It would be really, really good to hear more examples of organizations that are systematically working to strengthen dialogue and response. And commitment. I think John pointed out that we need to have commitment to responding to our fantastic efforts to monitor in the face of all of these challenges. It's just as important as monitoring. What are the processes for social dialogue that we can put in place constructively with governments? I think this is a big question. Do we really need to wait for the most horrible transgressions to spark change, or can we institutionalize the consideration of our monitoring efforts, the results? Right. The other thing is that monitoring efforts need to be contextualized at the regional level, but also at the national level. There needs to be good agreement on what issues to monitor and where to invest the efforts to monitor. And this looks different in different countries. So in the Pacific, according to some governance indicators, it's leading the Asia-Pacific region around governance issues. But maybe if you look within the family, there may be other issues that need to be looked at. If you look at South Asia, the issues are going to be different. But how do we get agreement with the governments and among government ministries around where we should focus on and invest our monitoring efforts? I think that's really critical. And finally, I just want to urge a closer look at institutional performance around engaging stakeholders in a meaningful way. This again comes back over and over and over again. It's something that ESCAP has done quite a bit of work on. It's a particular focus of our work, and we will continue to work on it. This is going to be really important for institutions to invest in, and we do see that there's some very good efforts, but needs to be deepened. So I'll stop there. I'll put some resources on the chat and look forward to hearing the discussion and more presentations. Thank you very much.
Great, and thank you very much, Hitomi, for a very interesting presentation, which I think highlights the importance of carrying out, regular monitoring at regional level as well as the national level. Of course, as you mentioned, there's a need to sort of contextualize some of the information that's being gathered in terms of national context and even local context. But I think it is really important, and congratulations to UNESCAP for its efforts, particularly in the area of Goal 16 plus, and continued good work in that area. So now we will move from your presentation to our second last speaker, who is Patricia Galdames from the Community of Democracy's Permanent Secretariat. And Patricia is going to give us more of a global overview. Again, we began with the global overview, and we're moving back to looking at in a more global way at the implementation and monitoring of Goal 16 plus. So Patricia, over to you to talk to us about the importance of partnerships and collaboration in promoting the monitoring and implementation of Goal 16 plus.
Thank you, Deirdre, and thank you, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. We're here at the Permanent Secretariat of the Community of Democracies based here in Warsaw, Poland. Since the adoption of the Sustainable Development Agenda, we knew that the implementation of the SDGs required the meaningful participation, coordination, and collaboration between all stakeholders, including governments, multilateral organizations, international organizations, regional organizations, private sector, civil society, everyone working together at the global, regional, national, and local levels. We knew that we need cross-sector collaboration and multi-stakeholder partnerships that bring together diverse expertise and, more importantly, resources as well to increase impact and ensure much needed progress of the SDGs, especially right now in this decade of action. The importance of partnerships is recognized, of course, in Goal 16, and especially through Target 17.16 that acknowledges the importance of multi-stakeholder partnerships. The Community of Democracies understands this very well, Its mission to support democratic institutions and promote the democratic values enshrined in the Warsaw Declaration is also firmly anchored in the 2030 agenda. With broad geographical participation from new and old democracies, from the global south and developed countries, the community of democracies has the structure necessary to facilitate this multi-stakeholder and cross-sectoral approach which can help move the agenda forward. For the past 4 years, the community of democracies has worked extensively to promote the implementation and monitoring of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, especially on Goal 16, Goal 5, and Goal 17. Using its multi-stakeholder platform that brings together governments and civil society, the COD has promoted dialogue, held discussions on the SDGs, including at its governing council meetings, on the role of the private sector and the implementation of the SDGs. Last year, at the 30th Community of Democracies Governing Council meeting held in June, there was a statement on democracy and the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda that was passed, which underscored the importance of engaging with the private sector and civil society to further sustainable development. The COD has also held regional discussions on Goal 5, ensuring women's full and effective participation at all levels of decision-making. We conducted a study a few years back as well through our working group on enabling and protecting civil society on the importance of ensuring an enabling environment for civil society as it relates to the Sustainable Development Goals, which actually highlighted the importance of a thriving civil society as key to achieving long-term sustainable development. There was also some case studies that were mentioned in this report, and I'll be happy to share that afterwards with everyone. And of course, the community has especially promoted the advancement of Goal 16, including through the development of the global voluntary supplemental indicators for Goal 16, which were provided as a non-prescriptive tool for states to use in measuring critical aspects of peace, just and inclusive societies. But making progress in democracy is not often easy. It requires a system of alliances amongst like-minded organizations. In the same way, ensuring progress and achieving the SDGs requires this concerted action. The development, for example, of the voluntary supplemental indicators for Goal 16 is a very important example of this, of building alliances and strategic partnerships. The indicator framework was a product of a larger SDG 16 initiative between the community of democracies, UNDP, and OGP, which aimed at two things: creating the voluntary supplemental indicators for Goal 16, which was led by the community of democracies, and also provide support for national monitoring processes for Goal 16, which was led by the UNDP and supported pilot countries in establishing reliable, objective, and independent monitoring systems for Goal 16 and integrated indicators into national planning. For example, for the development of the supplemental indicators, the COD also engaged in a consultative process, convening a group of experts, which included civil society, academic institutions, individual experts, and other organizations that provided key input and assisted in reviewing the proposed indicators. UNDP, also a governance center, was especially important in this process. Other examples of partnerships to advance Goal 16 can be seen in a series of democracy forums that the community of democracies has held in the past few years in Asia, with the kind assistance of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea, and in partnership with Asia Democracy Network and also Asia Development Alliance. In 2018, we held Democracy Forum in Busan, and in 2019, the Ulaanbaatar Democracy Forum. And this year, we were meant to hold the third Asia Democracy Forum in Kathmandu. This forum will still take place, but it will take place completely online due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Additionally, assistance will also be provided to civil society in Asia, aimed at building their capacity to access and conduct research to produce human rights-based SDG monitoring reports that take into account the COVID-19 crisis. And these reports are expected to be presented and discussed as well in the online forum later this year. Just like the community, several multi-stakeholder initiatives and partnerships at the global and regional levels aimed at advancing the implementation of Goal 16 and related targets have been in place since the adoption of the agenda, helping states make progress on the ground. Those initiatives and partnerships have played a very important role in helping to advance the agenda and contributed progress made on the ground. They have helped channel international political, technical, and financial support to implementers at the national level. And these initiatives have also served as forums for the exchange of best practices and ideas to help facilitate collective action. Another example of this has been a partnership between International ID and the Community of Democracies, who for the past also 3 years, we have been working together to enable these spaces for key stakeholders to have open conversations on the 2030 agenda, and very specifically on Goal 16. Since the adoption of the agenda, like I was saying, different spaces and platforms have been created where stakeholders have continued also to share these good practices and implementation and monitoring and incorporation of SDG 16 into national level policies and budgets. We've extensively discussed challenges such as the sensitive nature of SDG 16 and data collection, which is still a big challenge right now. And also many valuable resources and tools to assist in the implementation of Goal 16 have been produced in the past few years, such as the one just mentioned a few minutes ago by the Human Rights Danish Institute for Human Rights on education monitoring tool. The Spotlight reports and the VNRs mentioned earlier also by John Romano. And of course, this report on realizing the potential of Goal 16 of the 2030 Agenda to promote and protect civic space, which is being launched at this event, just to name a few. It had really been 4 years to work and advance on Goal 16 implementation and related targets with different multi-stakeholder alliance, public and private partnerships and civil society platforms, all working together for implementation. And advancements have been made, and we've been talking about different challenges as well. But today we are also confronted with the COVID-19 pandemic, a crisis that has impacted all aspects of public life, putting also democracy at risk and significantly impacting progress made in the Sustainable Development Agenda. I think it has never been more important to leverage right now a multi-stakeholder partnership to strengthen SDG implementation, effective monitoring, and accountability to ensure that no one is left behind as a result of the pandemic. As mentioned recently in the adopted Community of Democracy's 20th anniversary Bucharest Statement, democratic systems of governance built on respect for human rights, strong institutional capacity, transparency, and trust have the best basis to overcome crisis and build back sustainably. Moving ahead, strengthening and accelerating the implementation of Goal 16 will be critical to ensure that we build back better. I invite all of you to foster these partnerships at the global, regional, national, and subnational levels, which include the involvement of all sectors of government, international organizations, regional organizations, academia, private sector, civil society, but that also take into account, which is very important, to take into account women and youth that was just mentioned. Connecting and including young people is certainly critical to what we do next. We at the Community of Democracies actually will be holding next week an online youth forum, which will actually be discussing the role of young people in advancing the SDGs. So as I mentioned before, and was mentioned before me this morning, this whole of society approach is certainly necessary. Everybody needs to be involved. The Community of Democracies will continue to remain dedicated in helping promote the advancement of the SDG 16, and I encourage you all to remain committed as well into making the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda a reality. Thank you.
Patricia, thanks very much for a wide-ranging overview and very useful description of the activities of the community of democracies that are relevant to Goal 16 Plus. And I was very struck by the fact that you emphasised the importance of creating a system of alliances and strategic partnerships around Goal 16 Plus. And I hope perhaps that one of the outcomes from today's side event is that all the organisations who are involved in it will continue to work together and perhaps develop some common initiatives around promoting the monitoring and implementation of Goal 16 Plus. So you also mentioned, Patricia, the key role of a thriving civil society in Agenda 2030, and indeed your own report that you carried out in that area is referred to in the report, which we're going to now launch very briefly, and I'm going to call on my colleague Justin Mohan Singh from the Asia Development Alliance to just say a few words about the launch of the new Forus ADA report on Goal 16. So just now I'll call on you and ask you to be brief, but to launch the report here today before we open up for discussions and Q&A with our participants. So over to you, Justin.
Thank you so much, Deirdre. Thank you all of you for your great presentations. And so I will just go to the last line of what Patricia says, creating and building alliances among various stakeholders is a must. And that's what we have been working on. That's what is our main message of our Goal 16 report. Apart from that, I'm really excited to launch our Goal 16 report that's realizing the potential of Goal 16 of the 2030 agenda to promote and protect civic space. So our Goal 16 report is basically talks about one of the indicators of Goal 16 is 1610, and emphasizing on freedom of expression, assembly, and association. So we have tried to build in our arguments around these three areas, and also we have had 18 countries participating from all over the globe, and they are Forus and other partners. So from Asia we had 5, and the rest of the Forus partners from all parts of the globe. So very happy to release and to talk about this Goal 16 report that is, we are launching. And some of the recommendations that I would like really wanted to focus on, that we have been talking about, we have been talking a lot about citizens-led data. So I think this is the time that we go into that and we talk about citizens-led data. And and this report, if you go to the report, you will see a lot of indicators and recommendations proposed by the civil society. So I would like really wanted you to look at those indicators, and which have been also given not only by civil society, but we have also referred to the indicators by OSCHR, DIHR, and other organizations. So, and there is one more section on indicators by the by ADA, which has been the result of 3 years training on Gala, where the participants, they came together in different regional forum, and they also prepared the indicators. So I would like really wanted you to have a look on these indicators and recommendations. The recommendations are basically divided into 2 levels. They are the international level or the global level, and the national levels. So some of the recommendations, like the international communities, institutions of global governance, donors of development assistance, and philanthropic organizations and foundations should play a stronger role in effort to preserve civic space. Because as we have seen from 2016, when the VNRs are presenting, no VNR actually mentioned the issue of civic space, which was also highlighted by during Priya's presentation. So I think it's very important for us to have a look at it. And then we are also talking about the formal space should be established at the international level to facilitate government and other diverse stakeholders, that we have been discussing about creating alliances and building alliances, especially in the context of data provisions of Goal 17 of the SDGs. And human rights and the fundamental freedom awareness raising should be strengthened at all the levels. Some of the national, our proposed studies have also they point at the national recommendations. For example, they have also referred to OHCHR indicators, for example, availability of national policy, legal framework which enables civil society space and participation, existence of independent national human rights institutions, number of amended regulations at the national level, and so on and so forth. So I think these are some of the recommendations. And we also heard from from the minister from Nepal, who was talking about how the establishment of National Human Rights Commission, so which talks about Goal 16. So I really appreciate, and we hope to continue our partnership and building alliances, and and work on Goal 16, because as we know, Goal 16 is the enabler and accelerator of all the goals. So that's one of the reasons for us to do advocacy on. I hope you enjoy reading this this report, and please feel free and please share with all the stakeholders across all the region and among governments, UN institutions, for the private sector and the civil society. So thank you so much. Happy reading. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Justna, and thanks very much for that endorsement of the report. I'm going to ask my colleague, my communications colleague, just to put the link to the new report, which has now just been launched, into the chat box here for anybody who'd be interested in looking at it. So I'd like to open up now to the floor for any questions or comments or inputs. I'm sure many of you are working in the area of Goal 16+, and we'd love to hear your reactions, your inputs. So I would suggest there's two ways of indicating that you'd like to speak. One is to raise your hand. So you have a little raise hand symbol on the Zoom screen in front of you that you can click on, or alternatively, you can put a question or a comment into the chat box. So over to you now, our audience, our participants, to share some of your own thinking and ideas with us. So I'll wait to see whether I can see a raised hand or a comment in the chat box. And maybe just while I'm waiting for somebody to do so, I might put a question to our speakers, and maybe to any of our speakers who are interested in responding to it. I suppose a key question at the moment for a lot of people would be, how is Goal 16 key to addressing challenges related to COVID-19? So I know some of you did mention COVID-19, but maybe a little more specific response to how Goal 16 could be key to addressing some of the challenges related to COVID-19. So would anybody like to take that question? Any of our speakers? Priya, could I turn to you or to John maybe to respond to that one just while I do see a hand up. As soon as we're finished this, I'll go back to Krishna, who wants to ask a question. Over to you, Priya.
I think part of it is at this point, and I did forget to mention, advocate for investment in SDG 16 start. So really from an advocacy point of view, commit to reiterating the importance of investing in this goal, but really looking at data disaggregation, like look at ways of taking a human rights-based approach to data to ensure that no one is left behind. So considering that we were not in the best shape before this crisis hit, and I'm talking globally, I think we're in a worse shape, obviously, and how do we build from that and recover from that is really trying to emphasize the importance of incorporating national development plans, ensuring that there's SDG 16 is in national development plans, and really emphasizing that a broad group of stakeholders needs to be engaged to ensure that no one is left behind. And I can send you a couple of more bullets and a statement that we've put out recently specifically on this.
Great, thanks Priya, thanks for that response. John, I might go to you as well if you're interested in responding just briefly to how you think Goal 16 Plus can address some of the COVID-19 challenges.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack on that side of things. I think, yeah, just as Priya mentioned, I think now is a great opportunity for us to see the SDGs and the response and recovery from COVID-19 through the SDG 16 plus lens. And I do think that, you know, especially when it comes to the recovery and building more resilient societies and more resilient institutions, I think SDG 16 should be seen as a mechanism for that. I mean, we've seen some of the countries that have had a stronger institutional response to the crisis do better because they've had good institutional coordination and good governance at the core of it. As Priya alluded to, there's a joint statement from the global SDG 16 plus community, the big global initiatives that we just launched yesterday. So I can provide a link in the chat that also outlines kind of the next steps, what needs to happen, especially in regards to COVID-19.
Great, thanks, John. Okay, so moving on then, I see Krishna has his hand up and would obviously like to make a comment or ask a question. So Krishna, over to you if you want to unmute yourself. So click on your microphone to allow your voice to be heard.
Okay. Thank you.
Great.
This is Krishna.
Can you just speak up a little bit, Krishna? We can hear you, but not very well.
Yeah, this is Krishna.
Great.
I'm from Nepal. On behalf of the Local Governance Association, I thank you very much for organizing this sort of very widely discussion forum with very much provocating issues and the things. But I have some maybe clue and question, you know, how to do it in the future, because this is a global agenda and we are thinking about the global partnership. But here again, you know, even our behaviors, we are categorizing the government system and the NGO or CBO categorizing. So unless and until we can break this vicious circle, bring together in wider cover range, you know, sitting together for civil society as well as the government institutions together in terms of resource sharing, you know, support for the capacity building, and bringing all in the same step, so no one can left behind. That is the scenario we are expecting. So I think how this global partnership can work together, you know, by in view of this last 5 years, what I am observing is who are in already, you know, in network, in, you know, in a kind of circle, in a community, they are tapping the resources, they are enjoying. And in the name of no one left behind and minority, this and that, rich and poor, but nothing is happening properly. So why not we as this kind of forum can pressurize to the formal sectors, let's work together, really playing with the real data and helping to the people for humanities, you know, and that is the scenario. How can we build it? So maybe like my institution in Nepal, we are by constitution, we are responsible for monitoring as well as coordination of the local government's activities in together working with the communities, you know. So this organization is totally neglecting because there is no authority. It is only for monitoring. So monitoring means everybody is dislike. Monitoring do not like. Evaluation nobody likes. So where is the transparency? Where is accountability?
Yes.
So please, let's make this forum working towards that region. I hope we can work better in future. Thank you.
That's great, Krishna, and thank you. I think that was more of a comment necessarily than a question. So thank you for that, a very valid point. I'd like to move now to Kedarkhadka from the Go Foundation. You have your hand up. If you could just unmute yourself, Kedar. So if you click on.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Perfectly, yeah.
Thank you so much for giving this opportunity to put my few words about the SDG 16. So I have just a short query with John and Priya and Kirstina. Those anybody can respond my query actually. You see, the global scenario has been changed by this COVID-19. And our movement has been restricted globally, and we have another opportunity to get together through the distance, like this Zoom meeting and so on and so forth. And at the same time, globally, the civic space has been going down. be it in any part of the globes. Many civil society leaders have been feeling, and even media has been writing their reports and articles and opinions. The civic space has been slowly going down, and the civic space has captured by the ruling government anyway in the globe. And also budgetary part has been also reducing. And you can take as an example that Donald Trump has taken back the support for World Health Organizations, and the mobilizing funds has been reduced.
Yeah.
And we talk much about the collaborating between government and civil society together. But
Yeah.
actually, the civic space, or the independent space of the media, slowly taken back by the global government. In this concept, would you still focus or stick on joint partnership and working with the government, or you can have your independent space, fundamental human rights space, independent, and secure that space and support for that initiatives? So I see some in the coming days are not good for the civil society movement in the globe.
Okay, so Kiral, if I can just summarize what you seem to be asking, and you've put your question to Priya and to John and Kirstina and anyone else who wants to answer, is that things are getting more difficult for civil society, civic spaces shrinking, and you're asking the question, given how difficult some governments are making it for civil society, making conditions for civil society, is civil society not better off to focus on trying to build that space for itself, rather than focusing on engaging in partnerships and working more closely with governments and others? Am I correct in that?
Yeah, for the first sake of the country context, in Nepal, we have a good relation with the government, and we have a joint reporting. We jointly prepared VNR report, and our honorable member has given a good speech, and also a member of NGO Federations. They have put a good collaboration and the continuity of that. But I don't see coming futures that marrying situation will remain in this or not.
So that's a very relevant question. So I'm going to put that to Priya or John or Kirstina, whichever of them would like to take that question, just about continued collaboration with government in light of some of the more negative trends that have emerged for civil society. Anybody like to or Patricia, perhaps you spoke a lot, Patricia, about partnerships. Would you like to respond to that questioner and give your opinion?
A lot of things to unpack from different comments in that question. I briefly mentioned, just as an example, what we're planning to do in Asia, and this is very minor, but we understand and we do follow up, and we have, of course, a civil society pillar as well. That's a very important partner for the community of democracies. And so we do follow up on what's happening with shrinking civic space, obviously. And it is because of our understanding of this that we're trying to provide very small subgrants that will be provided to different NGOs, civil society organizations in the Asia region, to be able to produce, as I mentioned very briefly in my remarks, to produce this national level reports that will take also into account, of course, what's happening right now with the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's SDG 16 reporting, but within this framework of the ongoing COVID-19. And it's our way of providing some very limited support at this moment to, again, civil society organizations. We're doing this work actually with Asia Development Network. And I believe, if I can find it, I'll send you the link, but I believe there's already a link that Asia Development Network already put in their social media as well. So we're planning to have these reports, to discuss these reports with, again, a human rights focus and within the bigger framework of COVID-19. We're also trying to, of course, we invite civil society to all of our governing council meetings. So we do have this continued discussion about what's happening with civil society, not only through the civil society pillar, but also through the working group on enabling and protecting civil society. One of the members of this working group is ICNL, and ICNL already has a lot of work that they're doing on monitoring this shrinking civic space right now with COVID-19. So it's a continued collaboration that we have in monitoring of what's happening right now with civil society.
Okay, great. So Patricia, you're really recommending capacity development of civil society, making funding available to it to sort of increase its awareness of human rights, but also, how to promote an enabling environment for itself. So that's very helpful and nice to hear about your initiative. Kirstina, would you like to respond? And then maybe I'll go to Priya.
Yes, thank you, Deirdre. It's a very relevant comment, and it's not that I have the answer for it, but I just want to point to that we're also encouraging, alternative data sources and organizations. So, for example, national human rights institutions are very well placed in this sense, I think, because they also mandated to report on, for example, for human rights mechanisms, and also when it comes to human rights education that I was focusing on. And they're also a state institution. So in that sense, I also want to encourage that that national human rights institutions and human rights commissions are involved and can kind of mediate between states and civil society.
Yes, exactly.
That was also just an input, because it is definitely a difficult situation.
Great, thank you, Kirstina. And obviously that applies to the countries where national human rights institutions are established. But yeah, it's very important not to forget them. They can play a very important role too. Thanks for that, Kirstina. Priya, any comments you'd like to add?
I think mine is more, focused on the issue of trust and trust building. And I don't think we should give up on that relationship with multi-stakeholders. So it's great, and yes, civil society needs to empower itself to, of course, advance and speak. But I think the question of trust building is a very slow process, but it's very important. And I heard a quote the other day from a private sector company actually saying that SDG 16 is it's basically making trust accountable. So really trying to trust in institutions, but also trusting in people and relationships and partnerships. And that goal 16 is a way to operationalize goal 17. So by working on goal 16, SDG 16, you're really touching on several aspects thematically and substantively, but how you advance those and how you measure those really has to come from a cross-section of society. So that conversation, even though it's quite fractured at the moment, needs to start at a minute level, one-on-one, really, with your professional not connections, but professional contacts, and how do you build that sense of trust. So it's a very slow process, but still very necessary. And
very necessary. Okay, so I like, Priya, you seem to be saying it's not an either or, that civil society, focuses on building itself versus the more partnership, collaborative approach. We should be doing both, but you're saying in terms of the collaboration and the partnership, it's very important to build trust. And I suppose I've personally heard a lot of comments being made during different side events I've attended in this HLPF about the need to create those spaces where different stakeholders can come together, be it, as you suggest, either at the local, immediate level, but also other spaces, maybe at the national, regional and global levels, where stakeholders can come together, get to know each other, build those relationships and build that trust. And I think that'll be very important. So I'm afraid to say that we have reached the end of our side event. I know there was somebody else who wanted to ask a question, but as it's somebody whose name I know, I can get back in touch with you afterwards and maybe we can exchange. But I'd like to thank everybody who participated in the call today in the side event. I think it's been a very interesting discussion. I'd particularly like to thank all of our speakers who made such important and interesting contributions. And I'd like to encourage you all to follow up. I mean, we have in the chat box there, people have shared a lot of links. The Danish Institute of Human Rights has a very interesting website with lots of relevant tools for Goal 16 Plus monitoring. and implementation. And Forus has launched its report today, and there are many other ways in which we can stay engaged with this issue of working in a more effective way on monitoring and implementing Goal 16 plus. So even though we have to say goodbye now, I hope that all of us will come together again in other fora and even follow up. I think most of you have the emails of Justna and myself, who were involved in organising or co-organising this side event. So please do, if you have any suggestions or ideas or any follow-up you'd like to do, please do reach out to us and stay in touch. So thank you everybody for participating today, and we look forward to meeting you again at other side events, hopefully before the HLPF is over.
Thanks.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
So much. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye. Thank you. Have a good day.
Good night here. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.